are talking about the subject of liberty this week. You remember that the word liberty means freedom. And so we're going to go to Colossians chapter 3, and verse 14 says, "And above all these things put on charity, which is the bond of perfectness, and let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to the which also you are called in one body, and be thankful." This verse is telling us that if we will allow God to lead us and direct us, we can let that peace that we have, that sense of peace, be like an umpire for us. He says, let the peace of God rule. The word rule there basically means to be like an umpire calling strikes and balls. And he says, this is what you should do, and this is not what you should do. And you can follow that sense of peace and use that as a guide as to how to proceed in your life. And now turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 31. "For if we judge ourselves, we will not be judged. But when we are judged, we are chastened of the Lord, so that we will not be condemned with the world." So this is another verse that is giving us instruction, like the one we just read. He's giving us this instruction that says, if you will be honest with yourself and judge yourself and say, yeah, I didn't do what I should have done there, or I didn't do it quite the way God told me to do, that is an act of humility. And by doing that, you're putting yourself in this position where God can deal with that in a way that's positive for you. And he says the world, they're prideful. They don't judge themselves. They just do whatever they feel like doing, and they just act however they want to act. And they use their freedom in a way that is destructive. And so, as a result, they wind up receiving condemnation instead of correction. Because you can't correct someone who doesn't want to be corrected. But if you will judge yourself, he's saying, if you will recognize the truth and judge yourself by that truth, then you won't have to have somebody else judging you and condemning you and saying, you really aren't somebody that should be around decent people, right? And, some of us sort of take pride in that. I mean, there's a mentality that comes along that certain people, you don't really like people who are goody two-shoes or are just too good for themselves or putting on airs. And that sort of is a twisted way of recognizing the falseness in those people. And it goes off in a direction that's not positive, because you wind up shooting yourself in the foot in a case like that. You're rebelling against their falseness, but as a result, then you're putting yourself in a position of being in the wrong as well. And so basically what you do is you're the blind leading the blind, and you're going to fall in the ditch. So don't use your freedom as an excuse to do dumb things. Today we're basically just talking about how to exercise wisdom in our freedom, so that we don't wind up doing things backwards. Because there is a tendency with the idea of freedom to, like we talked about with Groundhog Day, there is this temptation, hey, I can do whatever I want. Wow, I'll just do whatever I want. And it never turns out good when you take that kind of a mentality. There are reasons that there are rules, and there are reasons that there are guidelines and guardrails. The point that we need to take from this is that God's desire is for us to choose to do good, not be forced to do good. This is sort of, for me, almost every time I turn a page, I see something that is anti-Calvinist. These verses about liberty tell us that we are free to do what we want, but we're not free of the consequences of doing wrong. And so, yes, you can go ahead and tear things up and ruin your life if you want to, but you don't have to. And that's sort of the point, is if you choose to follow the directions, then things will turn out better. If you don't choose to use the instructions and you want to just make things up, then you're probably going to fall on your face and it's not going to go well. That's going to hurt. But God would rather that you do it freely of your own choice and your own heart, rather than be beaten and manipulated and intimidated. And as I have said, you've heard me say this many times, all of that comes from paganistic ideas of a God who forces his will on you. And the God of the Bible absolutely does not do that. And that's why the Bible makes no sense to most people, because they have this image of God that doesn't match up with what they're seeing here. And so there's this temptation to push the two together and sort of see things that aren't really there. All right, so you're probably tired of me ranting about that. I will give it up for today, and we'll come back tomorrow. We'll talk some more about the subject of liberty. What goes up must come down.